I'm recording.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Sound Good podcast. I'm your host Michael.
I'm Micah.
And on today's episode, it's going to be a little bit of a heavier one with some old albums. Yeah, that's right, we went back to the old album shtick. We ran out of new albums. Bandcamp is unreliable. Right, Micah?
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
So anyway, we're going to kick it back with a couple old albums by bands Old Gray and In Reference to a Sinking Ship. We're going to start off this episode with the album that I recommended to Micah, and it is Slow Burn by Old Gray. So this album came out back in 2016, December 9th, 2016, under Flower Girl Records. Yeah, right? It's the third full-length album from New Hampshire-based emo screamo band Old Gray. Their first album being an autobiography, and I believe that came out in 2011 or 2012. So, without further ado, Micah, what did you think, my buddy, about this?
This isn't fair. I was trying to recommend you some heavy music for once, and you gave me something that's heavier but somehow not also. It's really bizarre.
Yes, what do you mean by that, man?
So it reminded me a lot of early, or I guess maybe to become full circle to it, at least the tone of like the kind of screamo it is, reminded me a lot of the what is it? The Pianos Become the Teeth album we talked about.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like, at least the sentiment is there in terms of, like, I guess at least the vocalist, you know, like the passion's kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, I would imagine that they're singing about some tragedy here. Maybe a little bit.
Maybe a little bit. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know where you get that idea.
So, yeah, I like how weird this album is, if that's a way to compliment an album.
Yeah, I guess. What do you mean by weird?
So it's not just kind of typical screamo at all. They do kind of delve into just kind of the kind of noisy full chord strumming, just fucking scream stuff. But it also just gets really weird with some piano lines that are really... I don't know what kind of filter to say is on there. It has a kind of old-timey filter on the piano.
Oh, just like
that you would hear.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like that little not scratched vinyl but warped vinyl sound to it.
Yeah, the song that the Evil Within kind of uses as its main theme, if people know that, like that video game, and also like the new Godzilla trailer kind of used that too, which was kind of funny. But
there's two references I don't get.
Yeah. Oh, I need to find a new co-host. Shit.
What do you mean you need? Man, this is a mutiny. Anyway.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, I know it's going to be kind of hard to say anything about this album
tough.
because, like we mentioned before we started recording, it's a very short album. It's 11 tracks and only 20 minutes.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, every song is barely like 2 minutes long. Honestly, the longest songs are there's only two songs that are above 2 minutes, and they're like 4.5 minutes long.
Like normal song length.
Yeah, everything else, but I think that works because I don't think that a lot of these songs would work if they were fleshed out or drawn out to like a full-length song. I think that they would maybe get a little tiring, maybe. Okay. The second song on the album, Communion, is incredible, I would say, because it has this really beautiful guitar line that has an actual really pretty bass line that follows it. Yeah. And then eventually it gets into the kind of screamo and kind of noisy feel. And I don't know. I think that I like the screaming for the most part. Sometimes it feels like it's trying a little too hard.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
What do you mean trying a little too hard? Like trying too hard to do what? Like
be screamy.
That's what I mean, really.
I don't know. There's like just a few where he's kind of clearly far away from the mic, and I think that he's trying to emulate a passionate scream, but it just kind of it comes off like he's actually trying to do that as opposed to that's the performance that's coming out. You know?
Okay. I see. I get what you're saying.
Like it feels a little too manufactured sometimes.
Okay.
But it's pretty rare.
Yeah, I will agree. I think this album, for the most part, is very genuine sounding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% sure on where you're talking about with the more contrived sounding passion, but
I didn't say contrived. That's your words.
So I mean, I'm not 100% sure where that would be. Or maybe it's in Blunt Trauma when he does like the solo vocals. I don't know.
Maybe. But then I guess you can't really get around the like Blood from a Stone talk. Like everything up to the 7th track, like Blood from Stone, was typically just kind of some really cool screamo with some really interesting elements, and then they just go into this kind of poetic spoken word thing that's just insanely dark.
It's a 4.5 minute long track, and I want to say easily the first 2.5 minutes of it are just this spoken word passage.
I think that there is like very, very light background clean guitar, but
at some point, but I don't think it's there in for the first half of the song.
You're right.
I'm pretty sure that it's just spoken word for like the first 2 minutes at least.
Yeah, it doesn't come in until 2.5 minutes in.
Yeah, okay.
And so I'd be super interested to know what the story is behind this, but regardless, there's just so many lines that are just events described that just kind of make your heart sink.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh no.
Oh no.
And it's definitely one of the most, I think, like, this is the kind of song that finally makes me kind of go like, I guess I see the appeal of this whole emo thing.
It's about damn time I've converted him, boys. Job's done.
No, I'm saying I see the appeal of it.
Damn it.
I'm not saying I accept the appeal of it.
Sorry, but you're wrong, and I am now taking co-host applications.
And I really love yeah, and so the album, I'm sorry, I'm just very jumbled on my opinions on
you're
this.
good.
It's pretty funny. It starts out pretty light, I think, and just proceeds to get fucking darker and darker until you get to like Blood from a Stone. And then the song after that, just called 2. The song before Blood from a Stone was called 1, and then you have 2 right after it. And it's this really pretty just piano song. I don't know if you remember that at all.
Yeah.
Just a minute and a half of just straight piano. But the end of some lines absolutely just kind of hit a sour note on purpose.
Yeah.
Definitely on purpose. And I think maybe they were trying to go for a feel of either trying to look on a bright side or trying to cope, but like that darkness just kind of peeks back in, you know?
Yeah.
And I really like that. Giving Up to You was a really weird follow-up song. It's only 20 seconds long, and it's like several singers. It kind of felt a little Death Gripsy to me. Like this sudden, just like, what is this? Like, I feel like they didn't know how to transition to a new idea or something. So they just kind of threw this noisy track in there. And I think it worked for the most part. I really wish A Letter for Zach wasn't more spoken word.
Wasn't more spoken word?
I feel like it kind of killed the effectiveness of like Blood from a Stone.
Yeah, maybe. I guess kind of.
Like it really kind of retroactively undid what like the impact of what that song was to me.
Yeah.
So if that either, I don't know, maybe if it just wasn't so close in the track number to it, because you literally have less than 2 minutes until you get to another spoken word song.
Yeah.
after you're trying to cool off from the impact of what that song was.
I think that's kind of tough to do on this album though, because like you said, I think partially
Like Blood from a Stone felt like a really good ender, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at.
Well, what I was going to say is I think partially the reason that Like Blood from a Stone works so well is because it is 7 tracks in.
Yeah.
Now, those 6 tracks before it only equating to about 6 minutes on the album, it's still 6 songs before you get this huge 4.5 minute break, basically.
Yeah.
So I guess I can kind of see what you mean by getting that again only 1 minute and 45 seconds after what you just heard. But yeah, that's a really hard one because then you got to think, well, where else should they have put it? Because if they put A Letter for Zach before Like Blood from a Stone, then Like Blood from a Stone just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but that might be an instance where it's like, just don't have it there or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just realized something. I do think though that because A Letter for Zach is a little more quiet than Like Blood from a Stone, it doesn't necessarily weaken the effect like Blood from a Stone gives, because that track is more heavy both emotionally and musically, whereas A Letter for Zach is a lot more calm and almost like nostalgic sounding.
Well, yeah, and I guess it's very clear that, I mean, obviously in the song title too, it's kind of, you're trying to, I mean, I would imagine they're trying to pay homage to somebody else, so it's like they have, it's very heartfelt towards another person, whereas like Blood from a Stone is a very introspective to some kind of personal thing that just gets super dark. And that's really interesting that, I mean, I guess if you just kind of think about life in general, you're a lot harder on yourself than you are on other, like it's very uncommon to be that kind of dark towards another person.
Right.
But I guess I was just going to say that in terms of closers, On Earth as It Is in Heaven is a super solid closing track.
That's the other one that's over 4 minutes long on the album,
and
like
it's
almost 5 minutes.
Yeah, and it's just one of those kinds of songs where you hear it and you're like, okay, this is the end of the album. And I think it's a really good cool off after everything you just went through, because it's a very ambient, actually very musical track. There's not a lot of dissonance in any of the instruments anymore. And I don't know if it's supposed to actually, just thinking about it now, I don't know if it's supposed to kind of emulate like, yeah, death is great or something. I would not put that past them. Like, finally, that's because it is kind of a sweet release a little bit.
Yeah, right.
After the heavy stuff that you just went through. But
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very easy album to throw on and just kind of experience, since it's only 20 minutes long, and I listened to it several times.
Yeah,
in preparation for this.
Is it something you think you'll be coming back to ever, or is it just kind of a one-off now because you've heard it and had to listen to it for the show?
That's a really tough one.
Yeah.
I would probably come back and listen to this more than I would Pianos Become the Teeth, actually.
Okay.
Just kind of surprising. I think it's because it embraces such a dark tone much more that it is a lot more interesting to me, because it's a really dynamic album as a whole. There's so many different types of sounds coming at you constantly between like we kind of talked about it with I want to say, was it Everything Is in Your Hands, that has some of that. It's kind of borderline spoken words, but it's also sung, you know, and they kind of take a step back from the screamo part, but the screaming's still in the background, and then eventually they transition into that. So there's some dynamics in terms of what kind of vocal choice, and then sometimes you just kind of have some really distorted piano that's melodic but also dissonant, and there's some really interesting guitar lines across the whole album. But yeah, I think it's a lot more, it's definitely on the more interesting side of emo / screamo from my viewpoint.
Cool,
I guess. Yeah.
Well, all right.
Yeah, thanks for making me listen to it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for ruining my day. I actually loved it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm here to help. All right. So, now with that album out of the way, we will go into the In Reference to a Sinking Ship EP, Aimless, and I will go ahead and let Micah introduce that one.
I am not your brother, sister, father, mother, just a bastard.
Yeah, so I think I became aware of this EP around 2012 because I got into a really neat metal band. I don't know what I would classify them as, I guess. I guess some version of death metal. I got really into Dark Sermon around 2012, so like very late high school, and I found out that they had an EP as a different band called In Reference to a Sinking Ship.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so they only had one EP that came out in 2010 called Aimless, and I guess they changed their name just because they thought it was too long for people to remember.
They were correct.
I don't know. I actually really love the sound of In Reference to a Sinking Ship versus Dark Sermon. Dark Sermon kind of sounds a little too edgy.
Yeah, true. I will give you that. Yeah.
But to be fair, I mean, it's kind of the BT Bam syndrome of...
God damn it.
I mean, but it really is. It's like people are like, what's that? And they don't have the luxury of an easy-to-say acronym either.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I was being a dick with it. Yeah.
Ass.
Mm-hmm. And so...
Ass.
Yeah, and I think that overall, because we were talking about, you were like, I'm really glad this was an EP, and I was like, yeah, me too, dude. But guess what? They didn't really change their sound a ton going between the two band names. I don't know if they changed their lineup much. It's kind of hard to find info on that, just because like their time as In Reference to a Sinking Ship doesn't have a lot of...
It was so short, it just didn't even matter.
Yeah, like you have to go to the Dark Sermon page to get info on it. But
I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, Dark Sermon as a whole is kind of just, at least their first album. They got a little more doom metal on their most recent album, but their first album as Dark Sermon is a lot of this just drawn out to a 45-minute album, which, as you said, is your exact fear.
Ooh,
and that's why I love coming back to this, because it's such a short and concise thing to listen to. But... Yeah, what was your thoughts on it? I know it kind of caught you off guard because you didn't really have any idea of what it would be.
So it's actually kind of funny. It's actually kind of funny, like looking through my notes, what I wrote down for this album. I was kind of listening through and making notes as I went along, and I started off when I was listening to it. I started off obviously the first track, Defeated. Mm-hmm. I was like, damn, I was like, this band like everybody in this band sounds pretty talented. Like the vocalist sounds really good, the guitar, like the lead guitar sounds really good, the rhythm guitarist was good, the drums were good. Couldn't really hear the bass that much, but I think that's just a flaw of like most metal music.
Yeah, this type of metal, that bassist was kind of using the typical tone of kind of like a really deep kind of jangly, because they do have some instances where the bass line gets its own moment, but it's a very typical metal bass tone.
Yeah.
But
so,
continue.
Nothing really on the bass, but I wrote for Defeated, I was like, the leads are kind of generic sounding, but whatever, it sounds good. And by that I mean like the guitar runs they were doing over the chugs, like they kind of sounded like very, what you would expect from a metalcore band or a death metal band, just those really arpeggiated runs up and down.
Yeah.
The next song I was like, damn, this is heavy and all this, and I was getting so into it, And I liked the little thing they did with the octave drop on the lead riff, on that little lead riff during the second breakdown. They brought it from being all up high into being down low, and I was like, okay, whatever, that's another thing. But and then I just started realizing about halfway through that song, I was like, damn, these tracks are starting to sound pretty similar, yo. Yeah. Which unfortunately suffers, like, makes this album suffer hardcore, or not album, this EP suffer hardcore, because it's like the songs are good on their own. Yeah. In isolation, they're all very good, but the only track that really stood out to me as being somewhat different, or at least different enough for me to remember it off the top of my head, was Bloodline. And I think it's only because of the heavy as fuck intro, where he comes in with the "I'm not your brother, mother," like all that shit just going off and rattling off this Bloodline. Yeah,
and there's this really dope, just like kind of weird dynamic with like that vocal and the rhythm that's going on behind it. Yeah,
it's hitting right with the rhythms and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had to mention that because in my notes I literally just wrote down this song comes in hard as fuck. But I didn't have any comments on Aimless because I thought, well, this just sounds like the two songs before it, and I didn't really have any comments on the last track either because I was like, well, it's just sticking to form. So I really wanted to enjoy this album more than I did, but realistically, it was just, there wasn't a lot for me to get interested in. Like, it was very formulaic, and I realized that right away on my second listen through. I thought, okay, it's intro here, it's just everything they were doing was very predictable.
Yep.
There was nothing new introduced in this album, nothing new melodically really ever. It was always just chugs with some kind of going over it. I did really like the vocals. I think the vocals were probably the best part of this whole thing.
He does a really good of emulating just kind of raw anger.
It just reminded me of like This Is Exile era Whitechapel almost.
Yeah, and I kind of honestly like from the way the verses are structured, because you were talking about how it's kind of stereotypical, just like kind of running up and down, while the drums are kind of going and everything. I feel like they have a lot of influence from Black Dahlia Murder a little bit. It's like a little bit, like in terms of like how that kind of goes. Like when a verse is going for Black Dahlia. I
guess. I mean, if they are influenced at all, then it's just like literally a less technical one. Like,
absolutely. That's
yeah. They don't sound like musically. They don't sound anything like the Black Dahlia Murder.
But I mean, if you
probably enjoyed it a little bit more.
Yeah, but then also if you just kind of think about how, I mean, Trevor from Black Dahlia, I mean, he sings in a very specific kind of single tone scream, and that's kind of what's going on here too. So it's not like they don't sound the same, but like what they're doing is kind of the same, like similar.
Yeah, I can catch that, I guess.
That's kind of what I'm feeling from that.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just it's really weird to try and think of a lot of things to say about this album because I keep calling it an album. It's just an EP. It's really weird to say a lot of things about this EP because it's only 17 minutes long. It's only 5 tracks, and 4 out of the 5 sound like each other. So it's hard for me to like make any distinct criticisms of it because other than they sound too similar. Because if I say something was bad in one song, there's a good chance it was probably bad in every other song on the album.
Yeah, and like every song does have a thing that's interesting and cool, but like for the vast majority of the songs, though, they are kind of relying on the samey things.
I think the one part that every song does like differentiate itself from the other from like really well is like the little chug breakdowns they do.
Yeah.
Every song has a different pattern, nothing is the same, and that's good because that would have made this awful.
Yeah, and this is definitely not a band that even as Dark Sermon, like there's no real emphasis or like kind of eye rolling on the chugs, they're always utilized really well. It's just kind of everything else is
eye rolling,
kind of rehashed. Everything else, like it's only eye rolly when you're listening to them back to back,
Yeah, that's a good word to
is
use,
the thing.
rehashed.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, and it's worth mentioning that yes, their debut album as Dark Sermon is 43 or 44 minutes basically total, and it's I really do prefer this EP over anything as Dark Sermon personally, just because it's a much more listenable. Like you can pick it up and it's over pretty quick, and you're like, that was a really good, like pretty neat experience. Because I'm picking up everything this band is putting down, and there's a lot of potential there. It's just I wish that they would explore some other avenues.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. I wrote on my notes for Bloodline was when I realized how samey the EP was sounding. So I wrote, glad this was only an EP because I probably couldn't handle a whole ass 30 to 40 minutes of this, and I still wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah, and I think that I haven't listened to it enough, and I feel really bad about it, but their album that came out in 2014, they haven't released anything since then. I'd hope that... Oh, I guess they're on an indefinite hiatus. That's cool. Sick. So,
nice!
Well, but either way, their second album called The Oracle, I really thought was interesting because they really did kind of take a much more slow and kind of closer to doom metal approach to this formula, and that in and of itself sounds pretty interesting, but I need to actually listen to it a little more to get a handle on what my opinion on that would be. But no, damn, that's a bummer. I didn't know that they were on hiatus. I'm glad I caught them live.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm glad you told me that. I didn't know that this was just Dark Sermon renamed. That was something you failed to mention to me, but that was pretty cool.
I mean, I wanted to hide
I know.
that.
It was a little surprise.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny, though. But, yeah, that's really all I got.
There's not a lot, really, though.
Yeah. So, to keep in good pattern with our shitty outros, this is just where I'm going to cut it.
Yeah. No.
Alright, everybody, that does it for another episode of the Sound Good podcast. I hope you enjoyed our talks about the album. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on iTunes and Google Play. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at @ItSoundsGoodPod. Give us a like on Facebook, and we'll see you next week.